On the morning of August 18th, 2018, a 41-year-old man named Vladimir Kostenko stepped out of a taxi onto a desolate road in the middle of the Alaskan wilderness. All he had with him were his cell phone, a solar-powered charger for his phone, and a backpack that contained some clothes and 5 pounds of oatmeal. He actually had left his home country, Russia, when he was in his early 20s because he was being persecuted for his Christian beliefs. And so now, in the United States, he lived out in Washington state. Lately, Vladimir had been feeling really lost. One of Vladimir's family friends was this guy named Dmitry Kudrin, and he owned this small cabin way out in the middle of the Alaskan wilderness. At some point, Dmitry said, if you want, you can go use my cabin and sort of focus on yourself and sort of get right with the world. And Vladimir had happily accepted. Dmitry had also told Vladimir that when he went out there, he really ought to bring a gun with him because this is truly the wild. But Vladimir had said no. And so he told Vladimir, okay, fine, but when you're out there, I need you to communicate with me regularly. And Vladimir promised he would. However, after 6 weeks of Vladimir being at this cabin, those pretty regular updates just abruptly stopped. In early November, Dmitry decided to get into his plane and fly out over the area where this cabin was and see if his friend was down there. And he's circling around the area where his cabin is. Dmitry had this camera on the underside of his plane, and he had this screen that he could see from the cockpit that was basically an enhanced view of the ground down below. He sees right in the middle of his screen is his cabin. It all looks good. There's smoke coming up out of the chimney. Dmitry sees on his screen that the front door of the cabin opens, and his friend Vladimir walks right outside onto the porch and he waves at Dmitry. And at that point, Dmitry's thinking, okay, Vladimir's just fine. But about 2 months later, Dmitry was once again in his plane flying over the area where his cabin was. Because over these last 2 months, he continued not to get any text messages or any communication from Vladimir. And the winter in Alaska is full bore. Dmitry gets as low as he possibly can. He realizes something. There's no smoke coming out of the chimney. But Dmitry couldn't land anywhere nearby. He immediately contacted Alaska state troopers. The state troopers didn't launch some huge search for Vladimir because they weren't actually sure he was missing. The troopers told Dmitry that what they were going to do instead is just comb through airline records to see if maybe a Vladimir Kostenko had taken off. And this really frustrated Dmitry. 3 days after filing this missing person report, he flew out to the cabin. He gets off the helicopter. He sees that the front door of this cabin has clearly been boarded up from the outside. Pries it off the front door, and he looks inside. Vladimir is not inside, but the cabin looks immaculate. But that was it. Vladimir, for reasons completely unknown, just decided to board up the cabin and disappear into the Alaskan wilderness. Friends and family, and even some authorities, believe there is a chance he could still be out there somewhere, but nobody knows where. All the family has to go off of is the final image of Vladimir.